what are some things that, back to fertility, things that like simple things that women aren't doing that could actually enhance their fertility?
Okay, I call these my 5 non-negotiables because this is all coming back to the idea that every single day there are decisions we make, whether we realize it or not, that are either increasing our inflammatory burden or they are improving it. And what I want to say before I dive into them very quickly is that the inflammatory system is tightly linked to reproduction. So acute inflammation is your body getting a cut, healing from that. Acute inflammation is actually super important in ovulation. If you take NSAIDs like Aleve, Motrin, Advil, you will go through the hormonal changes of ovulation, but the follicle will not rupture or release an egg. So you cannot take those, or you should not be taking those around ovulation. But many women are not aware of that. So those are medications. If you take them, only take them when you're on your period and not at any other time in your cycle. So
I didn't know that.
yeah, and that's crazy, right?
Yeah.
So inflammation is a normal body response that is helpful. However, chronic inflammation is not. So this is when your immune system is constantly turned on because it's exposed to the world or a variety of stimulus. But what starts to happen in a chronic inflammatory environment is it is feedback to the brain, interferes with the hypothalamus from interpreting and responding signals, and it actually goes in and is detrimental to the DNA inside the egg and the sperm. And then for the egg, even more so, because the egg have the mitochondria that get passed on to the embryo, we see that chronic inflammation and therefore insulin resistance, which go hand in hand, can majorly contribute to mitochondrial dysfunction, poor metabolic health, and therefore bad egg quality, bad embryo quality. And even when we do IVF, and I think this is an important way to frame this next part because sometimes people will be told, well, just do IVF and that's all you need to worry about. But even in IVF, I can only work with the eggs and sperm that I'm given. So this is your opportunity to influence that egg and sperm quality before you do a cycle. And I think it's so sad when people go through IVF, which is expensive, takes time, it's emotionally, physically challenging, only then to have a suboptimal result and start down this pathway of, well, what can I do? Maybe it's egg or sperm quality. You should go focus on these factors. We should be doing these before we want to get pregnant, while we're trying, if we're going through fertility treatments, because as a human, you deserve to go into this saying, I'm doing everything I can. I can't control every outcome, but just like any goal you're chasing, I'm going to learn about it. I'm going to know how to advocate for myself, and I'm going to know that I'm bringing my best to the table that's possible. So a lot of these simple things that you can do all counter back to trying to decrease inflammation and insulin resistance. So what are they? Number one thing is sleep. So, right, it's not sexy, but only 2/3 of US adults get more than 6 hours of sleep. And that's a low number.
That's really low.
It's really bad, right? And
Which means their testosterone sucks.
and as does their ovulatory pattern and their egg quality. So women need a little bit more. We usually say 7 to 9 hours is what people need. And most women need at least 7.5 hours, especially during the luteal phase where your metabolic needs are higher. Sleep is when your body heals inflammation, for lack of a better word. It's when it's going to go and heal up from everything you were exposed to during the day. More than that, sleep's really important to counter insulin resistance. And also, when you sleep, your gonadotropins, FSH and LH, are released from your brain in the early morning hours. So this benefit of sleep is so profound, meaning if you don't sleep enough, it is directly going to impact your hormone release, therefore your fertility. If you get 1 hour less sleep per night, you're going to get sequentially fewer eggs with IVF, even with IVF. So it's going to directly impact the number of eggs that we can get. We also know that circadian rhythm is important. So increased sleep variability for men or women results in a lower monthly pregnancy rate and a longer time to pregnancy. So it doesn't mean it's impossible to get pregnant, but you even said your testosterone is going to suck. For men and women, your body is wired to make sure that you can raise a child in this environment. And sleep is the best feedback mechanism you can give that everything is working appropriately. So quick recommendations: a cool room, set the environment, make it dark, wear a sleep mask, consider a sound machine, put your electronics further away, make sure you get in bed with enough time. Melatonin can be advantageous. It's an antioxidant. IVF studies have even shown that utilizing melatonin has been improved egg quality. Everybody doesn't need melatonin, and it's not a more is more medication because it can suppress the brain. So I typically recommend people start with 1 milligram and at most 3 milligrams a night if you're going to try melatonin.
But I will just add about melatonin. There's some data that melatonin, when you look at the labels on supplements versus what's in the supplement, is extremely variable. So definitely, if you decide to use melatonin, if that's right for you, make sure you're getting a supplement that shows third-party testing that is reliable. I don't know all the data on melatonin, but I do know that.
Yeah, I'll give a plug because I'm a medical advisor for Subco, which is a company that you can look up the supplements you're taking and you can see their scores. They independently test them. They give you all of that information. So if you're just trying to say which one might be better or it's less quality, you can investigate that on your own because it is tough when it comes to supplements, as we said earlier. I think one of the biggest things that I see with sleep, I'll be interested to see what you say, is partner discordance. One person goes to sleep, sets the stage, goes to bed, and the partner jumps in bed 3 hours later. Usually this is the woman going to bed earlier. The man is coming in later saying, I'm a night owl. But that's very disruptive to both people's sleep patterns to not be sleeping together.
Well, I will say, I just had a patient the other day who her husband wears a sleep mask, and every time he moves, it makes noise. So her sleep is terrible. And I find that sleep divorce, which is a term, actually benefits those couples because they both sleep better and then they can be together and still have time for intimacy. But it's like when you're in bed together, you know that that's like sort of on the table. Whereas when you go to sleep, like you sleep and you're not bothered and you have better quality sleep and then you're happier and you're more,
then your libido's better. Then your whole relationship's better.
Everything is better when you sleep better. So I think that it is something people do, and they sort of are embarrassed about it. They hide, we sleep separately. Yeah. It's okay. If you need to sleep separately, by all means, sleep separately. Like when I was a resident and my husband was not, I would sleep in the basement because he would wake up every time my pager went off. Oh. And he was a light sleeper. And I was like, okay, I'll just sleep separate when I'm on call. And for me, I would fall right back asleep. It wasn't an issue, but like you have to do that sometimes, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you don't love each other. Right? Like you don't have to sleep in the same bed.
Yeah, I think we just sat here and said sleep number one. First place you should start to move the needle. It doesn't cost money. It's a behavioral change. And it's that important that if you have to remove yourself or your partner or create a different environment, it's that important to your health, your hormones, your fertility right now, but also your long-term health in the future. It's truly one thing that our bodies need. And I can't even believe that, I used to wear that like honor badge. Like, I only need 5 hours of sleep.
Oh my God, we all did.
Oh,
we all did.
It was just, I look back on that, like, how did I even function? Because now if I don't get enough sleep, I feel terrible the next day. From sleep, I always say the next two pillars are going to be muscle, movement and muscle, and then also how we manage stress. And for both of these, I'd like to give the fastest explanation possible for insulin resistance, if I can.
Sure.
Okay, so you eat food. Food gets broken down into its different molecules. Glucose is the fuel for your cells. So you eat, glucose is in your blood because it gets broken down from your food, and your pancreas is going to send out insulin. Insulin is a hormone, and what it does is I like to think about it like a salesman, going up to the cell, knocking on the door, allowing glucose to go in. So when life is functioning perfectly, glucose levels rise, insulin comes out, knocks on the door, glucose goes in, they both lower, la-ti-da, you go back. For a variety of different reasons, what starts to happen with insulin resistance, glucose levels in the blood get higher. And therefore, insulin is released more and more frequently. And this is the really terrible analogy that I like. What are you going to do if a salesman comes to your door every single day?
You're going to stop opening the door.
You're going to stop opening the door. So when you stop opening the door, this is what's happening in your cell, saying, no, thank you. Like, I've seen you before, insulin. I'm not going to open the door. Well, inside your cell, it's really hungry because it's not getting the glucose that it needs. And so then a process starts where the glycogen, or the storage in your liver, starts to break down and more glucose gets into your blood. And then more insulin is released. And then insulin's like the salesman banging on the door. So finally, your cell opens it, allowing the glucose to go in. And that's insulin resistance. It takes a much higher insulin level in order to get the cell the glucose that it needs. Yet high insulin, as you know, is a growth factor. So it's causing fat distribution in our abdomen, more inflammation, and even more than that, in the ovary specifically, insulin resistance changes the ovarian response to FSH and LH. It's directly toxic to mitochondrial function and to egg quality. So we see this direct relationship between insulin resistance and reproductive outcomes. Higher rates of recurrent pregnancy loss, poor outcomes with IVF cycles, and that's even in patients who don't have PCOS. All of that to be said, when it comes to muscle, a lot of times I get asked about exercise, and we grew up in a culture or a timeline where exercise was to look a certain way, to achieve a certain aesthetic. Mm-hmm. And even the medical recommendations were so cardio focused for so many people. But if we simply want to look at fertility and hormone health, Building and using skeletal muscle is one of the best things you can do. This is for men and for women. Inside your muscle is a transporter called GLUT4, but what I like to think about it is the key to the door, meaning glucose no longer needs insulin to get into the cell when you are using that skeletal muscle. Glucose can easily get in, therefore glucose lowers, insulin lowers, and you can break this cycle of what's happening. So movement, you should lift weights, build muscle 3 times a week if you're a woman at all stages of reproductive life. So you don't want to be pregnant yet, you're young, 3 times a week. If you are trying to get pregnant, if you're going through fertility treatments, if you are pregnant, when you're cleared postpartum, when you're in perimenopause, this should be the core of what we do, because using that muscle is going to be key, and we've got to build it to use it to its full potential. That doesn't mean that other activity is not helpful, but that's something that I didn't learn till much later. That wasn't explained to me in that way when we were in medical training.
I don't think we even really talked about resistance training. It was just like, maybe a line on a slide, resistance train.
Right.
Is good for you.
And now it's, when we start thinking about things that people aren't doing that they can move the needle on themselves, this is a huge one for the majority of my patients.
And I don't know if it's exactly the same for females, but for males, the data on the testosterone would say that using large muscle groups, going close to failure, meaning using high volumes of muscle groups, is actually beneficial for hormone health, for testosterone production.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's similar.
It's similar for women too. Yeah. That, really going to failure on one muscle group is much more important than compound exercising all over. And so really kind of trying to go to the extreme, it builds the muscle the best, but it also utilizes it in such a way that is the most hormonally healthy, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Chronic stress, you mentioned this earlier, and I think it's something that so many physicians dismiss, and especially in the infertility space, because infertility is stressful. It's terrible. I walked that road. I walk it with patients every single day. It is very stressful by the process itself. But we have to not let that kind of keep us away from the discussion about what's happening in your body when you experience chronic stress. Chronic stress is so abnormal, but the stress response system is normal. So your body releases cortisol to stressful events, and cortisol is known to be an inflammatory hormone because it changes how your body's working for a purpose. The bad analogy of the bear. If you see a bear, you want to run away. Cortisol is going to increase, and one of the things it's going to do is go back to that liver process, break down glycogen, put more glucose in your blood, because you need the glucose to run, survive, get away from the bear. And if we did run from the bear, all that glucose would get used up by our skeletal muscle. It would go back to normal. We would recover and get back to homeostasis or baseline. But that's not what causes us to be stressed nowadays. It's not bears. It is having a bad conversation, it's a work meeting, it's a bad doctor's appointment, it's an email, doom scrolling. We're sitting here and we experience chronic stress. So our bodies raise our cortisol, we feel it, glucose goes into our bloodstream, but then what do? What do most people do? They stress, eat.
Or they stress in
they
do some maladaptive behavior.
And do they stress, eat, they drink, they look on their phone more. Like, we worsen this process because we don't understand truly what's happening inside our body when we're feeling this way. And we're searching for some short-term, dopamine hit to make us feel better, because being stressed is not a good way to feel. Well, the advice of just don't stress about being stressed is so passive aggressive. I can't even handle it. But let's just say a few different things. I like to think about this 3. Yes, when it comes to stress, cultivating a life that has less unneeded stress is going to be important. Whether this is cutting out toxic people, saying no to things, how you schedule your day, we should always pay attention to that. But that's not the only answer. 2 is going to be moments where you give your body release from that cortisol. 20 minutes a day, if you can, is going to be ideal to reset the system and make it more sensitive. You and I are wired really differently, so this is probably different things, but it can be going outside, journaling, meditation, mindfulness, acupuncture, yoga, therapy. It doesn't really matter. All of those things. Yeah. Exactly. So having moments to let the cortisol drop without your phone is going to be really important to build into your day. And I like the mindset of, the world is stressful, so what can I do about this? Let me kind of build in those protective mechanisms, because I will encounter stress today. But 3rd, and probably most important, is when we do encounter those stressful situations that are pushing us over the edge, we should think about how our body works and fight to get back to baseline. So instead of stress eating Sour Patch Kids, we should go for a 5-minute walk or do squats in place. Understanding that glucose has just been shoved into your bloodstream and then allowing you the opportunity to try to use it up to recover from this stressful event is going to make you feel better the fastest. Yet we don't really hear that advice for dealing with these acute stressful interactions. So when we think about these 3 things, sleep, stress, exercise, they really all work together to fight against this chronic inflammatory burden and lower that down so that your body has more resilience in the day-to-day encounters. And then the next 2 buckets are going to be the foods that you eat and the toxins that you're exposed to.
What is the optimal diet for fertility?
I think the optimal diet is obviously one that's mostly going to be whole foods that are unprocessed. The number one most important thing is going to be high in fruits and vegetables. They're high in fiber, high in nutrients. From fertility studies, couples who ate more servings of fruits and vegetables got pregnant faster, had better egg and sperm quality, had less miscarriage rate. But we see a lot of people maybe not eating very much fruit or being very selective about what they are eating. So I don't restrict any types of fruits and vegetables. 2 servings at every mealtime is going to be the fertility recommendation. That's what should go on your plate first. From there, we want to build it out with things that are less processed. And I'll admit some of the nuance here. Fertility studies group all foods together. So if we look at red meat, for example, they're putting a grass-fed steak and a hot dog in the same category. And then they look at what's called quartiles for a lot of nutrition studies, right? So they put them into groups, lowest exposure, highest quartile of exposure, and then they compare those 2 groups. And we're trying to see an effect, but sometimes it might be overemphasizing one without understanding the nuance of everything in that category, not the same. Yeah. But the red meat data for fertility tells us that if you consume the highest quartile of red meat, you have fewer embryos develop with IVF, and you have an increased stage of endometriosis going to laparoscopy. We also see that for every serving of meat that a plant-based protein is put in place of an animal-based protein, women ovulated better and had higher fertility rates. So I think that a diverse diet is going to be the key here. We really want to make sure we are incorporating some of those plant-based protein options, beans, lentils. Those have great fiber benefits as well. Mm-hmm. Fiber is the food for your gut microbiome, and your gut is your first line of defense. So in the gut, if you are eating foods that do not have fiber, you are not supporting your gut microbiome. This there worsens inflammation for the very shortest one sentence of what the gut microbiome does.
And puts you at risk for colon cancer.
It does.
And this is my biggest concern with people who do very extreme diets is they don't get enough fiber.
Yeah. I mean, we're really worried about the carnivore diet, for example, because it is so low fiber. It does, if we're looking through the globe of fertility, the gut microbiome is really important in estrogen metabolism, hormone signaling. It's its own endocrine system. But we are living in a colon cancer crisis right now, right? And yet we're also seeing a lot of people eating well under the fiber recommendation. So I think it's important for people to know that, animal meat does not have fiber in it. It doesn't mean that it's bad for you, but it does mean that having good fiber sources is important, and having a diverse diet is really advantageous. Fish up to 3 times a week. It is a really great, source of omega-3 fatty acids. Eggs look relatively neutral on the inflammatory scale, but they have some really great nutrients in them, choline, B12, that can be really helpful, especially for people who are vegetarian. So recommend those. The dairy data is whole fat dairy in limited amounts, not skim, because it's more processed and you're losing some of the nutritional benefit from it. But just like we're seeing across the board, we want to limit sugar, added sugars, non-nutritive sugars. We want to limit the ultra-processed foods. It's not that it's a never, but those things should not be consumed on a day-to-day basis. And the way I frame it for my patients is your day-to-day, you should be eating lots of diversity, lots of whole foods, things that are less processed. We really want to try to eat the rainbow, really improving that fiber, because fiber is going to fight inflammation the best. And then we're able to have more resilience and recover if you want to eat cake at dinner at this special occasion. But when we're constantly eating those type of foods, it's increasing that inflammatory burden. Your glucose level in your blood, that glycemic index is going to be elevated. More insulin will be released. It's going to be very hard to break the system if we are not really focusing on our dietary change and optimizing that on a day-to-day. So we want to make the majority of the choices that we do in the best way that we can. It's not that every decision has to be perfect. And I really want to get people away from this is the diet for fertility, because that seems like a short-term thing. Yet everything I'm sitting here saying, I know you recommend also, because this is an anti-inflammatory diet. This is the best for your body's health, for hormonal health. And it makes sense because if fertility is a health marker, then of course the diet recommended is going to be the one that's going to decrease inflammation and insulin resistance and help your cells at a metabolic level the most.
Yeah, and I would say that a low-fat diet is also not necessarily. We were raised in this era of low-fat diets being very important, but having a diet that has some healthy fats is actually very, at least for male fertility, very beneficial.
Cholesterol is the backbone for all sex steroid hormones. So absolutely, we need fat. We love to see it from olive oil, nuts, avocados. Healthy fats are an amazing source of that cholesterol backbone, but your body cannot make progesterone if you don't have enough cholesterol in your diet.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then toxins. I don't want to spend a ton of time fear-mongering people about toxins, but I think it's important to give maybe some advice on things people can change, like small changes they can make that can make a big difference.
I think you're asking the question about endocrine disrupting chemicals, but I'd like to start by answering it with behavioral toxins. So the number one thing that I'm seeing in my practice right now impacting fertility is cannabis use in men. So cannabis use, either by men or women, drastically impacts your fertility.
Yes.
So women who use cannabis have 25% lower rate of getting eggs in an IVF cycle and 28% lower live birth rates. That's wild.
Yeah. 1 in 4.
Yeah. Men who use cannabis, we see profoundly lower sperm counts. We see increased fragmentation of DNA. We see increased miscarriage in the female partner when only the man is using cannabis. And so this is a modifiable factor that's been normalized by society.
Yes.
So just because something is normalized or socially acceptable does not mean it's healthy. And there's a lot of people who think that it's healthier than alcohol or healthier than other behaviors, but it's quite detrimental. So I'm really want to give that plea that I think it's so important that we look at these behavioral toxins. Alcohol is not helpful either. It causes chronic inflammation and insulin resistance. Smoking cigarettes obviously can be detrimental to hormonal health across the board, but these behavioral toxins we have to include in the discussion. To the question you actually asked me, to endocrine disrupting chemicals, these are chemicals that directly impact our endocrine system. They both cause chronic inflammation. They harm the gut. They cause increased gut permeability, but they also can impact different endocrine organs. And they all work a little different, but it can be your thyroid, your brain, your ovaries. So when we think about endocrine disruptors, the big categories here are going to be paying attention to what's happening in your kitchen, the food you eat, and the products in your bathroom. And again, the adage here is the things that you use most commonly, the things you use every day. That's really what I want you to start to pay attention to. So your favorite water bottle should not be plastic. We really should remove plastic from the kitchen. Plastic should never get heated up in the microwave or the dishwasher. So we really want to be looking at different options to put our food in, both for storage and consumption. A big one right now is everybody DoorDashes food, right? It can really be an easy option in a busy life, but that is usually coming in to-go containers that can be full of different toxins, and you can't change what they're putting it in. But what you can do is if it comes to your house and you're not ready to eat it, don't eat it out of the takeout container. I know we often want to save dishes, but put it onto a plate. If you're not eating it yet, put it into another dish if you're going to put it into the oven, so you can at least reduce that exposure. And then back to a lot of our processed foods, a lot of them are put into packaging that actually has a lot of these endocrine disruptors in them. So even healthy foods, in quotes, protein bars and things like that, the packaging is not always the best. So whenever possible, you should be relying on, whole foods as opposed to those that are processed and packaged, and leaving the protein bar for when you have to have it because you're traveling or you're on the go. But when you're in your house, that should not be what you are leaning on because you have a refrigerator and a pantry and options for more food. And then for your bathroom products, this is so nuanced. In the book, I have a whole chart to make it easy, but don't obsess over the things you rarely use. Meaning you have a special perfume you use once a month. Like, I'm well less concerned about that than the shampoo or the body lotion you're putting all over your body. And yet it's really hard when it comes to products because we have ones we like and our body reacts different, our skin reacts different. So take the time to figure out, like, one runs out, it can be expensive. Take the time to figure out what you want to replace it with. You can go to the environmental working group and look at Skin Deep, and you can put in your product and see. So just start by knowledge. Does the thing that I currently like, does that contain chemicals that can be impacting my hormonal system and my health? You search it up and it does. Okay, we'll flag it. When it's out, now it's trying to change that one, and you have the opportunity to research and figure out a better one. And the last thing I want to say here is that fragrance-free is different than unscented.
Yeah.
Okay. Unscented can be a scent. So we really want to search for things that say fragrance-free and not unscented.
Yeah, it's very complex. We had a chemist on the podcast once, and basically she's like, a lot of these large companies, they do, tons of testing on their products, but also even the packaging it's in. So when people try to transfer it to another package, they're actually destabilizing or potentially, like, maybe it's light sensitive or maybe whatever the case may be.
So interesting.
And so keeping it in the packaging it comes in is actually safer for the product and for you because you're using the product all over you. And two, some of these things that you put in the products in, they're flagging things that are not really toxic, like a scent, not necessarily toxic, but depends on what it is, right? And so I think it's really it's thoughtful to think about, but I would generally recommend safer to buy from larger companies because they will do a lot more extensive studies on these products.
They have more resources.
Yeah, they have more resources, whereas a smaller company may not do as many, and there's less regulation, in that space.
That's a really good thing, and it's tough. So we acknowledge that there's a 0% way to avoid every toxin that's in this environment.
Yeah.
Yet the world is becoming more toxic. Therefore, we owe it to ourselves to pay attention to what is happening and at least make the decisions that we can. Not to stress about it every day, but really all these things we're talking about are to cultivate your day-to-day life in a way that you do have that body resilience so that you can handle when things are off.
If you guys learned something from this episode, if you found it helpful, please subscribe if you're watching or follow the podcast wherever you're listening, because it makes a huge difference for people around the world to be able to see our podcast and get access to it. So as always, we're going to take care of yourself because you're worth it.